Jay Shetty starts the conversation by discussing the topic of stress, which he believes is a major issue in today's society. He notes that despite talking about it for a long time, people still have an unhealthy relationship with stress. Dan Harris agrees, stating that stress and anxiety are at an all-time high, with anxiety being a major contributor. He explains that stress is the difference between the demands on a person and their ability to meet those demands, while anxiety is fretfully projecting forward into the future and fearing bad things will happen. Dan Harris shares that he thinks the pandemic has contributed significantly to the rise in stress and anxiety, citing a lack of social connection and deep uncertainty about the future. He also mentions the noxious impacts of social media, political polarization, war, and climate change as contributing factors. Jay Shetty asks Dan which stress he thinks is weighing people down the most. And Dan responds that he thinks people often fasten onto things like work stress and economic stress, but there may be subterranean contributors that they're not aware of, such as social media and the media environment. He notes that humans are social animals and need to interact with other humans, but modern life often militates against this. Dan Harris emphasizes the importance of investing in relationships and making time for human connection. He shares a study from Harvard University that found that people who have strong relationships live longer and are happier. Jay Shetty asks Dan about his own struggles with social media and how he's developed a healthy relationship with it. Dan shares that he's not against social media, but acknowledges that it can be a source of stress and anxiety. Dan Harris shares a technique called distance self-talk, where he refers to himself by his name to create distance and give himself advice. He notes that this technique can help people develop a more compassionate and kind inner dialogue. Jay Shetty agrees, sharing his own experience of struggling with negative self-talk and how he's learned to be kinder to himself. The conversation turns to the topic of personal growth and spiritual development, with Dan Harris noting that it's a messy and imperfect process. He shares a tweet from a Zen Roshi that illustrates the idea that growth is not a straight line, but rather a series of squiggly lines. Jay Shetty agrees, noting that it's okay to make mistakes and that growth is possible, but it requires kindness and compassion towards oneself. Dan Harris shares a technique for reprogramming one's inner dialogue, which involves referring to oneself by one's name and giving oneself advice. He notes that this technique can help people develop a more compassionate and kind inner dialogue. Jay Shetty agrees, sharing his own experience of using this technique to overcome negative self-talk. He emphasizes the importance of being kind and compassionate towards oneself and notes that growth is possible, but it requires effort and intention. If you enjoyed this episode till now and want to listen to the complete episode, please subscribe to Quick Podcast Summaries on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for just $1 per month, and you can save an average of 20 hours per week of your precious time. It's a fantastic deal to save time and stay informed.